Zethkar's 4 eyes focused on the glowing display screen as another data packet arrived from the Sol system. The insectoid researcher's antenna twitched with mild interest as he processed the information about the newly contacted species. Humans, they called themselves. Their planet was named Earth according to their primitive translation systems. The Galactic Council's Xenoarchaeology Division had been busy these past months. First contact with new species always meant paperwork and lots of it. Every new world had to be cataloged, every species documented, and every cultural artifact recorded for the Great Archives. It was routine work, but Zethkar enjoyed the details. He clicked his mandibles together as he cross-referenced the Sol system coordinates with the master database. Standard procedure required checking all new planetary discoveries against the ancient precursor records. The precursors had mapped most of the galaxy long before any current species had developed space travel. Their ruins and data caches were scattered across thousands of worlds, filled with information that still helped the Council understand the galaxy's history. The computer hummed quietly as it searched through millions of records. Zethkar expected nothing unusual. Most new worlds showed up blank in the precursor files. The ancient race had been thorough, but they couldn't catalog every single rock floating in space. A soft chime made his antenna perk up. A match had been found. Zethkar leaned forward, his compound eyes studying the ancient text that appeared on his screen. The symbols were an old precursor script, which he had studied for decades. The translation software worked slowly through the complex language, parsing each symbol carefully. Interesting, he muttered to himself. The precursors had indeed known about this planet. But something seemed wrong with the translation. According to the ancient records, the planet's name wasn't Earth. The precursor text used a phrase that roughly meant Crucible of Nightmares, or the place where death learns. Zethkar checked the coordinates again. They matched perfectly with the human homeworld. He scratched at his carapace with one of his secondary arms. Translation errors were common with precursor texts. The ancient language was complex, full of metaphors and cultural references that didn't always make sense to modern species. Perhaps this was simply an old poetic name for what humans now called Earth. Zethkar flagged the entry for review and moved on to other files. But throughout the day, something nagged at him. The precursors rarely used dramatic language in their official records. They were usually precise, clinical, almost boring in their documentation. Why would they give such a frightening name to what seemed like an ordinary planet? 3 levels below in the Council archives, Vexana swam through the liquid atmosphere of her workstation. The aquatic being's gill slits fluttered as she processed Zethkar's query about the Sol system coordinates. As the chief database administrator, she had access to records that most Council members never saw. Her webbed fingers danced across the control interface as she dug deeper into the precursor files. The initial match that Zethkar had found was just the beginning. Cross-referencing the coordinates brought up dozens of other entries, scattered across different time periods and various precursor outposts. Vexana's large eyes widened as she read through the files. The planet that humans called Earth appeared in precursor records spanning thousands of years. Each entry used variations of the same disturbing name: the Crucible, Death's Workshop, the testing ground of endings. But it was the attached files that made her swim bladder contract with anxiety. Technical specifications, monitoring reports, and what looked like experimental protocols. The precursors hadn't just observed this planet. They had been actively studying it, watching it, documenting changes over vast periods of time. One file contained atmospheric readings going back millions of years. Another tracked extinction events and their aftermath. A third monitored the evolution of various species, with detailed notes about their adaptations and survival strategies. Vexana's fins trembled as she realized what she was reading. This wasn't random observation. This was a long-term experiment. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic sector of the Council station, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat across from 3 alien representatives, discussing trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. The human woman smiled warmly as she answered questions about Earth's history and development. Our planet has been through some challenging times, Sarah explained to the delegation. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts. But humans have always found ways to adapt and survive. We're quite resilient, I suppose. The 3 aliens exchanged glances. They had been briefed on human biology and found it fascinating how these beings could thrive in such diverse environments. Most species were adapted to very specific conditions and struggled to survive outside their optimal zones. "Your species seems remarkably adaptable," noted the tall, crystalline representative from the Kalari Confederation. "Most worlds we know of have produced life that is specialized for particular niches." Sarah nodded. "Earth has always been a bit unpredictable. Our climate has shifted dramatically over the eons. Species that couldn't adapt didn't survive. I guess you could say our planet taught us to be flexible." The discussion continued for another hour, covering topics like technology sharing and peaceful cooperation. Sarah found the aliens to be curious and friendly, eager to learn about human culture and capabilities. It was exactly the kind of positive first contact that Earth's leaders had hoped for. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt optimistic about humanity's future among the stars. The galaxy seemed full of reasonable beings who valued cooperation over conflict. She had no way of knowing that several floors below, two researchers were uncovering information that would change everything. Back in his laboratory, Zethkar received a priority message from Vexana requesting an immediate conference. He connected to her communication system, his image appearing in her aquatic workspace through a holographic projection. "You need to see what I found," Vexana said without preamble. Her usually calm demeanor showed signs of stress. "That planet you flagged isn't just mentioned in our records. It's documented extensively." She transmitted the files to Zethkar's workstation. His antenna began vibrating rapidly as he scanned through the data, monitoring reports, experimental logs, biological surveys spanning millions of years. The scope was staggering. "This can't be right," Zethkar said. "The precursors conducted a multi-million-year study of one planet? Why would they invest so much time and resources in a single world?" "Look at file designation P7741B, Vexana instructed. "The biological modification protocols." Zethkar's compound eyes focused on the screen as he opened the file. What he read made his exoskeleton feel cold despite the laboratory's warm temperature. The document described systematic environmental manipulation designed to create extreme evolutionary pressure. Artificial climate shifts, controlled extinction events, and careful introduction of challenging conditions. "They were testing something," he whispered, "using the entire planet as a laboratory." "And now we know what the test produced," Vexana replied grimly. "Humans." The two researchers stared at their screens in silence, the implications slowly sinking in. Earth wasn't just another world that had developed intelligent life. It was a carefully crafted crucible designed to forge something specific. And that something was now reaching out to the stars, making contact with the galactic community. Zethkar's antenna drooped as he considered what this meant. If the precursors had spent millions of years perfecting conditions on Earth, what exactly had they been trying to create? And more importantly, what would happen now that their experiment had finally reached maturity and was spreading beyond its original testing ground? The answers to those questions, he realized, might determine the fate of every species in the galaxy. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the Council's research networks. Within hours, xenobiologists, historians, and archivists from across the galaxy were accessing the files that Zethkar and Vexana had uncovered. Each new researcher who studied the data came away with the same disturbing conclusion. Earth was not a natural world. Dr. Kelthara, a renowned evolutionary biologist from the Andromedan Institute, reviewed the files with growing amazement. Her species had evolved on a stable, peaceful world where the most dangerous predator was roughly equivalent to what humans might call a house cat. The idea of a planet systematically designed to challenge life to its absolute limits was almost incomprehensible to her. "Look at this atmospheric data," she said to her research team via galactic communication link. "In the past 2 million years alone, this planet has experienced 17 major ice ages, 43 supervolcanic eruptions, and at least 6 significant asteroid impacts. Any one of these events should have wiped out complex life completely." Her assistant, a young academic named Jorth, studied the readings with confusion. How did anything survive these conditions? The temperature variations alone would kill most known species. Dr. Kelthara highlighted another section of the precursor files. According to these records, survival wasn't accidental. Look at this entry dated roughly 65 million years ago. The precursors artificially triggered the extinction event that eliminated the dominant species of that era. They caused a mass extinction on purpose? Jorth's voice carried shock and disbelief. Not just one. According to these logs, they've been manipulating conditions on Earth for millions of years, creating challenges, removing species that became too specialized, and forcing the survivors to adapt or die. They were breeding something specific. Meanwhile, in the Council's linguistics department, teams of translation specialists worked to decode more detailed precursor records. The ancient language was complex, but patterns were emerging that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Professor Yixtal, whose species specialized in ancient languages, gathered his team around a massive display showing hundreds of translated documents. His blue-scaled face showed deep concern as he pointed to recurring phrases in the texts. The precursors called it Project Culmination, he explained. They refer to Earth as their final testing ground and describe their work there as forging the ultimate survivors. But look at this section from the later files. The screen highlighted a passage written in formal precursor script. The translation appeared below in standard galactic text. Previous attempts on 17 worlds have resulted in failure. Subjects became either too aggressive for galactic integration or too specialized for adaptive survival. Earth Project represents final iteration using refined parameters. One of his assistants, a young linguist named Perrin, raised a tentacle in confusion. Previous attempts. They did this to other worlds too? Professor Yixtal nodded grimly. According to these records, Earth was attempt number 18. The other 17 worlds produced species that the precursors ultimately deemed unsuitable for their purposes. What happened to those other species? Perrin asked. The professor's expression darkened as he pulled up another set of files. According to these termination reports, they were eliminated. The precursors destroyed, the failed experiments and sterilized those worlds before moving on to the next attempt. The translation. Team worked in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Earth wasn't just an experiment. It was the final experiment, built on the lessons learned from 17 previous failures. In another part of the station, Council Security Chief Mordak received urgent reports from multiple research divisions. The massive armored being reviewed the incoming data with growing alarm. His species had evolved as apex predators on their homeworld, but even they would struggle to survive the conditions that had shaped human evolution. Sir, his aide reported, we're receiving analysis reports from 43 different research teams across the galaxy. They're all reaching the same conclusions about the human homeworld. Mordak's 4 eyes scanned the summary reports appearing on his screens. Biologists were documenting Earth's impossible evolutionary pressures. Geologists were mapping the planet's history of catastrophic events. Atmospheric specialists were analyzing air compositions that would be toxic to most galactic species. And the humans adapted to all of this? Mordak asked. More than adapted, sir. According to the biological reports, humans thrive in conditions that would kill most of us within hours. They can survive temperature ranges that span over 100 degrees. They can function with reduced oxygen levels that would cause unconsciousness in most species. Their endurance capabilities are unprecedented. Mordak studied a comparative analysis chart showing human physical capabilities against other known species. The numbers were staggering. Humans could run for hours without stopping, survive for weeks without food, and recover from injuries that would be fatal to most galactic citizens. What about their psychological profiles? He asked. His aide pulled up another set of reports. Equally concerning, sir. Humans demonstrate both extreme cooperative behavior and extreme aggressive potential. They form large, complex social groups but are also capable of sustained warfare. Their historical records show they've been in almost constant conflict with each other for thousands of years. Constant warfare, Mordak repeated slowly. And they survived as a species? Not only survived, sir. They thrived. Human population has grown exponentially even during their most violent periods. They appear to use conflict as another form of adaptation pressure. The security chief's mandibles clicked nervously as he processed this information. Most galactic species had evolved beyond large-scale warfare centuries or millennia ago. The idea of a species that had weaponized conflict as an evolutionary tool was deeply unsettling. But it was the final report that truly shook the galactic community. Dr. Enthek, the Council's leading expert on precursor technology, made a discovery that changed everything they thought they knew about the ancient race. Council members, he announced during an emergency session, I've found evidence that the precursor monitoring systems are still active. The chamber fell silent as representatives from dozens of species absorbed this news. The precursors had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only ruins and data archives. The idea that their technology was still functioning was startling. Active monitoring stations have been detected in 17 different star systems, Dr. Enthek continued. They've been observing Earth continuously for the past several million years, transmitting data to collection points throughout the galaxy. A representative from the Crystalline Assembly spoke up. Are you saying the precursors are still alive? Still watching? No, Dr. Enthek replied. The stations appear to be automated, following pre-programmed instructions. But here's what's truly concerning. 3 days ago, when humans made first contact with our patrol ships, every single monitoring station simultaneously activated a new protocol. He displayed readings from across the galaxy on the main screen. Identical energy signatures appeared from monitoring stations in distant star systems, all activated at precisely the same moment. What kind of protocol? Asked the council president. Dr. Enthek's expression was grim as he answered. A galaxy-wide alert system. Every precursor facility is now broadcasting the same message on ancient emergency frequencies. The translation is still incomplete, but the primary phrase appears to be the inheritors have awakened. The chamber erupted in concerned chatter as the implications became clear. The precursors hadn't just created humans as an experiment. They had built a vast monitoring network to watch for the moment when their creation would reach the stars. And that moment had arrived. As representatives argued and scientists compared data, one thing became increasingly certain. Humanity's emergence into galactic society wasn't a random event. It was the culmination of the largest, longest-running experiment in known history. The precursors had spent millions of years crafting the perfect survivors, and now their creation was ready to take its place among the stars. The question that terrified everyone was simple. What exactly had the precursors intended their perfect survivors to survive? The Council's medical division had never encountered anything like human physiology. Dr. Nexeth, the galaxy's leading expert in comparative biology, stared at the test results with a mixture of fascination and horror. Her team had spent weeks analyzing data from human volunteers who had agreed to participate in routine medical examinations. These readings can't be accurate, muttered her assistant. Dr. Krell, run the cardiovascular tests again. Dr. Nexeth's tentacles moved swiftly across the control interface. I've run them 6 times. The results are consistent. Human hearts can increase their output by over 300% during stress situations. Their blood carries oxygen so efficiently that they can function at altitudes where most of us would suffocate. She pulled up another set of data. Look at their muscle fiber density. It's unlike anything we've seen in nature. They can exert force levels that should be impossible for creatures of their size. And their recovery rates, Dr. Krell added, reviewing his own files. Humans can heal from injuries that would permanently disable most species. Broken bones that would end a career for us are minor inconveniences to them. Dr. Nexeth highlighted a section of the human anatomy charts. Their nervous system is equally remarkable. Pain tolerance levels that exceed our measurement scales. Reaction times that suggest their brains process information faster than should be possible for organic tissue. But it was the psychological profiles that truly disturbed the medical team. Dr. Vorthak, a specialist in behavioral psychology, had been studying human mental patterns and social structures. His findings painted a picture of a species unlike any other in the galaxy. Humans demonstrate cognitive flexibility that borders on the impossible, he reported to the medical team. They can adapt their thinking patterns to completely new situations within hours. Most species require generations to adjust to major environmental or social changes. He displayed brain scan comparisons on the main screen. Look at these neural pathway maps. Human brains create new connections at rates we've never observed. They're essentially rewiring themselves constantly, adapting to new challenges in real time. What about their social behavior? Dr. Nexeth asked. Dr. Vorthak's expression grew troubled. This is where it becomes truly concerning. Humans can form cooperative groups of unprecedented size and complexity. They've built civilizations containing billions of individuals working together toward common goals. That sounds positive, Dr. Krell commented. It would be, except for this. Dr. Vorthak pulled up historical records that Ambassador Chen had shared during cultural exchange meetings. Humans have also demonstrated the capacity for organized violence on scales that dwarf anything in galactic history. They fought wars involving hundreds of millions of participants. The medical team studied images and data from human conflicts throughout history. The scope was staggering. Battles spanning entire continents. Weapons capable of destroying cities. Conflicts that lasted for decades or even centuries. How did they survive as a species? Dr. Nexeth asked in bewilderment. This level of internal conflict should have led to extinction. That's just it, Dr. Vorthak replied. They didn't just survive. They used warfare as another form of evolutionary pressure. Human technological advancement accelerated dramatically during periods of conflict. They were using competition and violence to drive innovation. Meanwhile, in the Council's Historical Research Division, teams were uncovering more disturbing details about human development. Professor Kelm, a renowned galactic historian, had been studying human civilization patterns and comparing them to other known species. Every other intelligent species in the galaxy followed similar development patterns, he explained to his research team. They evolved past large-scale conflict early in their history, then focused on peaceful advancement and exploration. He displayed comparative timelines on the large viewing screen. Humans are completely different. They maintained active warfare right up until they achieved space travel. Even now, their military capabilities exceed their peaceful technologies. His assistant, a young researcher named Drix, studied the human development charts with confusion. They achieved faster-than-light travel while still maintaining weapons capable of destroying their own planet. Not just capable, Professor Kelm corrected. According to their historical records, they came close to using planet-destroying weapons multiple times. They developed the ability to extinct themselves before they developed the wisdom to avoid it. How is that possible? Drix asked. Every other species achieves social stability long before they reach that level of destructive capability. Professor Kelm highlighted sections of human history. Because their entire evolutionary process was different. Most species evolve in stable environments where cooperation provides advantages over competition. Humans evolved in an environment where only the most adaptable and aggressive survived. The research team studied human military history with growing amazement. Weapons development, strategic thinking, and tactical innovation that surpassed anything in the galactic archives. Humans had turned warfare into a science, developing concepts and capabilities that other species had never needed to consider. Look at this analysis of human strategic thinking, Professor Kelm continued. They plan military operations on timescales ranging from minutes to decades. They can coordinate complex activities across vast distances while adapting to changing conditions in real time. These capabilities would make them formidable allies, Drix observed. Or terrifying enemies, Professor Kelm replied grimly. The psychological impact of these discoveries was spreading throughout the galactic community. Species that had lived in peace for millennia were suddenly confronted with the reality of creatures that had been forged in conditions they could barely imagine. Ambassador Thyax of the Peaceful Collective called an emergency session of his government. His species had not experienced warfare for over 10,000 years, having evolved beyond such primitive behavior in their distant past. Council colleagues, he addressed the assembly, we must discuss the implications of these human discoveries. The research data suggest we are dealing with a species that has been deliberately crafted for survival under extreme conditions. Surely, they cannot be as dangerous as the reports suggest, commented Representative. They seem quite reasonable in our diplomatic interactions. Ambassador Thyax displayed some of the medical and psychological data on the Assembly's viewing system. According to these files, a single human could physically overpower multiple members of most galactic species. Their endurance capabilities mean they could pursue enemies across vast distances without rest. Their cognitive flexibility allows them to adapt to new situations faster than most of us can process them. But they've been peaceful in all our interactions, Representative Zelm insisted. So far, Ambassador Thyax agreed. But consider this. Humans have spent their entire evolutionary history in constant conflict. Peace is a new concept for them. What happens when that peace is threatened? What happens when they perceive a danger to their survival or their interests? The assembly fell silent as they contemplated these questions. Throughout the galaxy, similar discussions were taking place as different species grappled with the reality of humanity's true nature. In the depths of the Council archives, researchers were making even more disturbing discoveries. Ancient precursor files contained detailed analyses of human ancestors, tracking their development over millions of years. The records showed systematic environmental manipulation designed to eliminate weakness and reward adaptability. The precursors weren't just observing human evolution, reported Chief Archivist Velrith. They were directing it. Ice ages triggered at specific moments to force migration and adaptation. Predators introduced to eliminate complacent populations. Climate changes designed to reward innovation and punish stagnation. Every challenge that had shaped humanity had been carefully orchestrated. Every catastrophe that had nearly destroyed them had been precisely calculated to push survivors to new levels of capability. The galaxy was beginning to understand that they hadn't simply made contact with another intelligent species. They had encountered the product of the most sophisticated and long-term engineering project in known history. The precursors had spent millions of years crafting the ultimate survivors, and now those survivors were reaching out to touch the stars. What terrified everyone was the growing realization that the precursors might have had a very specific reason for creating such formidable beings. The question that kept galactic leaders awake at night was simple. What threat had been so terrible that the precursors felt they needed to spend millions of years creating the perfect weapons to fight it? The breakthrough came from the most unlikely source. Dr. Zarvek, a junior researcher in the Council's Xenoarchaeology Department, had been assigned to catalog routine artifacts from a recently discovered precursor site. While his senior colleagues focused on the dramatic revelations about humanity, he methodically worked through boxes of ancient data crystals that had been deemed low priority. Most of the crystals contained mundane information, supply inventories, maintenance schedules, and routine status reports. But crystal designation P9847X was different. Its data was heavily encrypted and marked with warning symbols that Dr. Zarvek had never seen before. Computer, run decryption protocol Omega-7 on this file, he instructed. Warning, the AI responded. This file contains restricted archival data. Council security clearance required for access. Dr. Zarvek paused. Restricted precursor files were extremely rare. Most of their technology was considered public information for research purposes. He contacted his supervisor, who escalated the request up the chain of command. Within hours, the highest levels of Council leadership were involved. Open the file, ordered Council President Andrex after reviewing the situation. Given current circumstances, we need access to any information that might help us understand precursor intentions. The decryption process took nearly 6 hours. When the file finally opened, its contents sent shockwaves through the entire galactic community. The document was titled Final Project Report, Termination of Predecessor Species and Implementation of Contingency Protocol. Omega. Dr. Zarvek's hands trembled as he read the translated text aloud to the Emergency Council session. Project Overview. After the destruction of our civilization by Specimen Type 17 from Testing World Designation Cathera, the surviving precursor remnants have implemented the final contingency protocol. President Andrex leaned forward in his seat. Specimen Type 17? They're referring to another of their experiments. Dr. Zarvek continued reading. Specimen Type 17 demonstrated excessive aggressive tendencies and insufficient cooperative capacity. Upon achieving interstellar capability, they attacked and destroyed 17 precursor worlds before our defenses could respond effectively. Total precursor population reduced to less than 0.3% of pre-contact levels. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The precursors hadn't vanished mysteriously. They had been destroyed by one of their own experiments. Keep reading, President Andrex ordered grimly. Termination of Type 17 specimens required activation of sterilization protocols and destruction of Testing World Cathera. Remaining precursor survivors have retreated to secure facilities to complete the final experiment. Testing World Designation. Terra represents our last attempt to create suitable successor species. Dr. Zarvek looked up from the document. There's more, sir. Much more. The file contained detailed analyses of what had gone wrong with the previous experiments. 17 worlds, 17 attempts to create the perfect inheritors of precursor technology and knowledge. Each had failed in different ways. Some species became too aggressive, attacking everything they encountered. Others became too passive, unable to defend themselves against galactic threats. Still others became so specialized that they couldn't adapt to changing conditions. Testing World Terra represents synthesis of all previous experimental data, Dr. Zarvek read. Subjects must demonstrate optimal balance between aggressive and cooperative tendencies. Environmental pressures calibrated to eliminate excessive specialization while maintaining adaptive flexibility. Monitoring stations activated to observe subject development and determine suitability for inheritance protocols. President Andrex's voice was strained as he asked, "What are these inheritance protocols?" Dr. Zarvek scrolled through the file, finding the relevant section. Upon confirmation of subject suitability, automated systems will provide access to precursor archives, technology caches, and defense networks. Suitable inheritors will receive full knowledge base and responsibility for galactic protection against future threats. Galactic protection against what threats? Demanded Security Chief Mordak. The answer was in the file's final sections. Dr. Zarvek's voice grew quiet as he read the most disturbing passages. Long-range sensors have detected signs of activity from designation void spawn in adjacent galactic clusters. Previous encounters with void spawn resulted in sterilization of entire galactic regions. Estimated arrival time in our galactic cluster: 4 to 6 million years from project initiation. The chamber erupted in concerned voices as representatives struggled to process this information. The precursors hadn't just been conducting experiments for scientific curiosity. They had been preparing for war against something called the void spawn. Dr. Zarvek held up a hand for silence. There's more about these void spawn entities. He found the relevant section and continued reading. Void spawn demonstrate complete immunity to conventional weapons and energy-based attacks. Previous civilizations attempted standard military responses with zero effectiveness. Only success achieved through deployment of Type 12 specimens, but Type 12 proved unsuitable for post-conflict civilization maintenance. President Andrex asked the question that everyone was thinking. What happened to the Type 12 specimens? According to this report, they were too aggressive for peaceful coexistence. After defeating the void spawn in their region, Type 12 specimens turned on each other and destroyed themselves within 2 centuries. The file contained military analysis that painted a terrifying picture. The void spawn weren't just another hostile species. They were described as something that consumed entire solar systems, turning planets into empty husks before moving on to the next target. Conventional weapons couldn't harm them. Energy shields were useless against them. Even nuclear warfare had no effect. The only successful defense strategy involved specimens specifically evolved for persistence hunting. Extreme adaptability and unprecedented cooperation under stress, Dr. Zarvek read. These characteristics must be balanced with sufficient aggression to engage threats and sufficient wisdom to maintain civilization post-conflict. Chief Historian Kelm spoke up from his position in the gallery. They were trying to create warriors who could defeat an impossible enemy, but who would also be able to build a peaceful society afterward. And they think humans are that perfect balance? Asked Representative Thiex. Dr. Zarvek found the assessment section of the file. Monitoring data from Testing World Terra indicates subjects have achieved optimal parameters. Species demonstrates required persistence hunting capabilities, extreme adaptability, and complex cooperative behavior. Aggressive tendencies present but controlled by social structures. Recommended for full inheritance protocol activation, but it was the file's conclusion that truly changed everything. The final section contained activation codes and instructions for the automated systems that had been watching humanity for millions of years. Upon confirmation of subject interstellar capability, all monitoring stations will activate Inheritance Protocol, Dr. Zarvek read. Subjects will be granted access to precursor knowledge base, defensive technologies, and responsibility for galactic protection. Estimated time until void spawn arrival: approximately 300,000 local solar cycles. President Andrex did quick calculations. That's roughly 75,000 years in standard galactic time. The file includes tactical assessments of human capabilities, Dr. Zarvek continued. Based on current development rates, subjects should achieve necessary technological advancement within acceptable timeframes. Species demonstrates required psychological resilience for extended conflict scenarios. The chamber was silent as everyone absorbed the full scope of what they had learned. The precursors hadn't just created humanity as an experiment. They had designed them as the galaxy's ultimate defense against a threat that had destroyed entire civilizations. Every challenge that Earth had faced, every catastrophe that had nearly wiped out human ancestors, had been carefully orchestrated to forge beings capable of fighting an enemy that conventional weapons couldn't touch. "There's one final section," Dr. Zarvek announced, a message addressed to whatever species would eventually discover these records. He cleared his throat and read the precursor's final words to the galaxy. "To the inheritors of our legacy, we have prepared what we believe to be our greatest creation. The children of Terra have been forged in the crucible of controlled extinction, shaped by pressure that would destroy lesser beings. They are hunters who can track prey across impossible distances. They are warriors who fight hardest when victory seems impossible. They are builders who create wonders from the ashes of disaster. But most importantly, they are protectors who will sacrifice themselves for those they consider family. We have observed their capacity for both mercy and ruthlessness, their ability to cooperate, and their willingness to fight. We believe they represent the optimal balance needed to face what is coming. The Void Spawn approach. Prepare them well, trust them completely, and pray to whatever gods you follow that we have succeeded where 17 previous attempts have failed." The file ended there, leaving the Council to grapple with a reality they had never imagined. Humanity wasn't just another species joining the galactic community. The emergency session of the Galactic Council lasted for 3 straight days. Representatives from every major species argued, debated, and occasionally shouted at each other as they tried to decide what to do with the knowledge they had uncovered. The galaxy was divided into 3 distinct factions, each with a different vision of how to handle humanity. The Elimination faction, led by Security Chief Mordak and supported by several militaristic species, argued for immediate action against humanity before they could become a threat. "We have seen what happened to the precursors," Mordak declared during one heated exchange. "They created a species too powerful to control and it destroyed them. These humans were designed as weapons. How can we trust that they won't turn against us as the previous experiments did?" Representative Zethrim of the warrior clans nodded in agreement. "The reports show that humans have been in almost constant warfare throughout their history. They have weapons capable of destroying their own planet. If we grant them access to precursor technology, they could become unstoppable." But the Containment faction, led by Ambassador Thyax and supported by the more cautious species, believed that humanity could be managed through careful supervision and controlled access to galactic society. "We don't need to destroy them," Thyax argued. "We can limit their expansion, monitor their development, and ensure they never gain access to the precursor inheritance systems. With proper management, they could be valuable allies without becoming a threat." Dr. Kelthera supported this position. "The precursor files show that humans have demonstrated remarkable self-restraint. Despite having planet-destroying weapons for decades, they never use them. This suggests they can control their aggressive impulses when necessary." The third faction, however, was the most surprising. The Protection faction, led by President Andrex himself, argued that humanity should be embraced as the galaxy's defenders and granted full access to their precursor inheritance. "The Void Spawn are coming whether we like it or not," President Andrex stated firmly. "The precursors spent millions of years preparing for this threat. They created humanity specifically to defend against enemies that conventional forces cannot defeat. We ignore their wisdom at our own peril." Council historian Kelm supported this position with additional evidence. The files show that 17 previous experiments failed. Humanity represents the culmination of millions of years of research and development. The precursors believed they had finally achieved the perfect balance of traits needed to survive what's coming. As the debates raged in the council chambers, humanity continued their peaceful exploration and diplomatic efforts, completely unaware of the cosmic significance of their existence. Ambassador Sarah Chen met with various alien delegations, discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges, wondering why some species seemed nervous around humans while others appeared almost reverent. The decision came down to a galaxy-wide vote. Every member species cast their choice: eliminate humanity, contain them, or embrace them as the galaxy's protectors. The voting took 12 hours as representatives consulted with their home governments, and considered the implications of each option. When the results were announced, the protection faction had won by a narrow margin. The galaxy had decided to trust in the precursor's design and grant humanity access to their inheritance, but the real test came when the Council decided to reveal the truth to humanity itself. A special diplomatic mission was organized, led by President Andrex and including representatives from all major galactic species. Ambassador Chen was invited to a formal ceremony that she was told would celebrate humanity's entry into the galactic community. The ceremony took place in the Council's Great Assembly Hall, with thousands of alien representatives in attendance. Ambassador Chen stood at the center of the vast chamber, wondering why the atmosphere felt so solemn for what was supposed to be a celebration. President Andrex approached the podium, his expression serious. Ambassador Chen, we have gathered here today not just to welcome humanity to the galactic community, but to share with you knowledge that will change your species' understanding of its place in the universe. Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of knowledge? The truth about your world, your species, and your destiny among the stars. Over the next several hours, President Andrex and the Council's researchers presented humanity's true history. They showed Sarah the precursor files, the monitoring data, the evidence of millions of years of directed evolution. They explained about the previous experiments, the failure of the precursor's earlier attempts, and the approaching threat of the void spawn. Sarah listened in stunned silence as the story unfolded. Earth wasn't a natural world. Humanity wasn't a random product of evolution. Every challenge their species had faced, every catastrophe they had survived, every adaptation they had developed had been carefully orchestrated to create the perfect defenders of galactic civilization. You're telling me, Sarah said slowly, that my entire species was designed as a weapon? Not just a weapon, President Andrex corrected gently. A guardian. The precursors believed that humanity represents the optimal balance between warrior and protector, between destroyer and builder. You were created not to conquer, but to defend. And you expect us to simply accept this responsibility? We hope you will, President Andrex replied, because the alternative is the eventual destruction of every civilization in this galaxy. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had learned. Finally, she spoke. I need to discuss this with my government. This is not a decision I can make alone. The Council agreed to give humanity time to consider their revelation. Sarah returned to Earth carrying the most important message in human history. The response from Earth was not what the Council had expected. 3 weeks later, Sarah returned to the Council station with a delegation of human leaders, including President Morrison, General Martinez, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, and surprisingly, a young philosophy professor named David Kim. We have discussed your revelation extensively, President Morrison announced to the assembled Council, and we have reached a decision. The chamber fell silent as the fate of galactic civilization hung in the balance. Humanity accepts the responsibility you have described, President Morrison continued. But not because we were designed for it. We accept it because it is the right thing to do. Professor Kim stepped forward to explain humanity's position. The knowledge that we were created as weapons is disturbing to us. But the knowledge that billions of innocent beings may face destruction is more disturbing. Whether we were designed for this purpose or not, we cannot turn away from those who need protection. Dr. Hayes addressed the Assembly's concerns about human aggression. You fear our capacity for violence, and you should. Humans are indeed capable of terrible destructiveness, but we are also capable of choosing when and how to use that capacity. We choose to use it in defense of those who cannot defend themselves. General Martinez spoke about humanity's military capabilities. You are correct that we have developed formidable weapons and strategies. But our greatest strength is not our ability to destroy. It is our ability to work together when facing impossible odds. We will teach the galaxy to fight as we have learned to fight, not for conquest but for survival. But it was President Morrison's final statement that truly impressed the Council. We understand that some of you fear us. Some of you wanted to destroy us before we could become a threat. We bear no ill will toward those species. Fear is a reasonable response when facing the unknown, but we ask you to judge us not by what we were designed to be, but by what we choose to become. The Council voted unanimously to activate the precursor inheritance protocols. Over the following months, automated systems throughout the galaxy began transmitting vast databases of knowledge to human scientists. Technology beyond humanity's wildest dreams became available for study and development. Ancient weapons capable of fighting impossible enemies were revealed and analyzed. But humanity's response surprised everyone. Rather than hoarding the technology or using it to establish dominance, they shared everything freely with their galactic neighbors. Human engineers worked alongside alien scientists to develop new defensive systems. Human strategists taught persistence hunting techniques to species that had forgotten how to fight. Human diplomats organized the largest cooperative military alliance in galactic history. The Void Spawn were still tens of thousands of years away, but humanity began preparing immediately. Not just preparing to fight, but preparing to protect. They established research stations throughout the galaxy, trained multinational defense forces, and developed evacuation protocols for civilian populations. Most importantly, they began teaching other species that survival was not just about individual strength, but about collective determination. They showed the galaxy that the greatest weapon against impossible odds was not advanced technology, but the unshakable will to protect those who could not protect themselves. As Ambassador Chen looked out at the stars from her new office aboard the Galactic Defense Coordination Station, she reflected on humanity's transformation from isolated newcomers to the galaxy's appointed guardians.